I love that you said that you kind of realized through writing the book that you were more of an empath than you thought. So what was that like? What was either the moment or moments of realization for you as you were creating this? I'm curious how it affected or shifted the way that you see yourself either now or in the past.
Yeah, and I always told my story from the lens of I was a very sensitive child. And sensitive certainly means I was feeling a lot of what was going on around me, but I was I realized now as an adult, knowing what I know now, that I really had, a very upper body and lower body intuition going on. I had four aspects really activated, and to a small child and an adolescent and someone who doesn't know that, that's very overwhelming and not fun, actually.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like a gift until you turn to it or learn more about it or move in that direction. But then, I started to really realize that so much of what I absorbed into my system at a very young age was the empathic experience. And that as I developed in my teenage years, I developed depression, I developed anxiety, I gained a lot of weight as a child. I could walk into the room and feel what everybody had, what was going on for them. And it wasn't until I had I had an angel encounter on the street in Boston, and I basically, I don't know if you want me to go into the story, but
yes,
I wrote about it.
Yeah.
So I came out of a nervous breakdown. That's what I called it. It was panic attacks. I went to the hospital. I was really in tough shape, and I was in my third semester in college in Boston, and I was trying to decide coming out of there if I finished the semester, or if I leave and forfeit tuition. It was a big decision. And my roommate and I at the time said, well, let's just go for a walk and we'll talk it through. So we're talking it through, and I'm telling her I'm having this call to Colorado. This is pre-internet. This is pre-Facebook call. I've seen it in a magazine. I had no other reference point for it, but I was called, feeling it and moving in this direction. And I ended up, we turned the corner at like Massachusetts Avenue and Newberry Street. There used to be a Tower Records on the corner. And I turned the corner, and there's a man standing there, and he's got a red jacket, and he's carrying a ukulele, and he has that's what I saw at first. And so he says, can I sing you a song for some spare change? And we said, no, that's okay. And he looks at me and he says, no, Wendy, you need to hear a song. And at that point, I look at him, and he's got a glow around his head this way, sort of vertically around his head. And he says, no, don't worry about the change. My name is Arias, and I'm going to sing you a song. And he gets down on one knee, and he sings me this song, Home on the Range Where the Buffalo Roam. One day you're going to get to Colorado. And he stands up and he gives me a kiss on the cheek, and he vanishes behind me. And my roommate and I look at each other and look back, and he's gone. And she goes darting off to see if she can find him. And I'm having a transmission experience on the street in Boston, where my anxiety is being completely healed in that moment. And she comes back and she's like, do you know what that was? And I said, yeah, I absolutely know what that was. And everything shifted after that. I finished my semester. I did move to Colorado. I had found a healing teacher. I was a musician the majority of my life, and singer-songwriter. And so I wasn't serious about being a healer. I wanted to be a rock star musician. And so I pursued, healing work, and I played music, and, I kind of did both until it became very clear that I was swimming upstream this musical direction. And I was really being invited to step into this practice. And that's how it evolved for me. But again, I always considered myself an intuitive healer eventually an intuitive healer teacher as students wanted to learn more. But once I started to recognize, not only are we navigating, and this is what the inspiration to write the book came out of, sort of the navigation of the trauma field. And, everything that had been stirring over the last 4 to 5, 6 years in the field, and people having overly empathic experiences. And I had this awareness and background of the energy body and what's happening in the body. And I just felt that if we could, if I could provide this information, it could be so helpful for all of us, including myself, because I'm practicing the work, and being able to move through this massive, evolution that we're in right now.
Yeah. It's interesting. I remember many, many years ago channeling. So channeling is a part of my work. And I remember channeling some messages. It was probably around 2007, 2008. And they were saying that you're going to see the world become far more feeling in the next decade. And I've joked about this before, that my interpretation of that was, oh, great, everyone's going to be all touchy-feely. But of course, it didn't necessarily mean that. And I think if you, as you said, look at the last 3-4 years and how a lot of the unhealed, unacknowledged, and acute trauma is now coming to the surface for all of us as a collective, it did strike me that the book just came out this year. And I thought, oh, interesting, after 2020 and the year that amplified so many of the things you're talking about, the anxiety, the panic attacks. And as I was listening to you, I remember my own breakdown, my own panic attacks. So much of your story is hilariously very similar to mine. And I'm sure for people who are listening or watching. And so I think, again, it comes back to, are we allowed to own that part of ourselves as empaths? Because when I grew up, and I'm sure same for you, it wasn't talked about. I think I only really first heard the term empath 20 years ago when someone told me I was one. And I thought, oh, she's just being nice. I'm sure I'm not like her. I see who she is and what she's doing in the world. But the difference for her was she'd understood it. And so it was now her gift rather than her curse, which really is what the book does. I think it kind of invites you to understand it, own it, use it, but also know how to navigate some of the trickier parts of your empathy and how they get tied up in our trauma or our ancestral stuff or things that we've gone through in life that trigger us. And I think often that's when it can get more activated too. So it's so important to be able to navigate all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting about the feeling guidance that you got, because part of empathic work, so a lot of times empaths feel that I'm an empath, therefore I take on the energy of others. But the empath is someone who feels the energy of others. Taking on other people's energy is called overly empathic. It's actually a different experience. But there's many tools and things we can do in healing, we can do to shift that, like why we're absorbing. But one of them, talking about feelings, is that we've been culturally, perhaps patriarchally, in a system, we've been conditioned to fear our emotions, to have shame around our emotions. And a lot of us, I'm making big generalizations here, but a lot of people received the teachings, quote unquote, children are meant to be seen, not heard, or you're punished if you show anger, or I'm sending you to bed without supper, without giving a child a connection. This shame that we've experienced around our emotions is part of what ends up happening for empaths, is that we're carrying so much of our own unprocessed stuff in the lower chakras specifically. And some of that is shame of our own feelings. And so literally in a split second, if somebody were having an emotion around me, and my inner self is afraid in that moment, I have a regression in that moment. In a split second, my body says, that's not safe, that's not okay if someone expresses anger. And so I end up fight, flight, or freezing or disconnecting. And that's the moments when transference happens energetically. But when we learn to have our own emotions and to ground ourselves and to be okay with the feelings and let them flow and challenge all of those old teachings that we've gotten, then we increase our capacity to be able to stay present in ourselves. And that's part of boundaries, is staying present in our bodies.
And it's funny you bring that up, because one of the most powerful turning points I had was being able to be with someone when they were in their feelings and not go into some kind of auto response, to kind of be in front of someone and going, oh, they're really struggling, but I don't have to save them, do anything, kind of bring something, because I did that unconsciously, as I think many of us do, for years on autopilot. And there was a breakthrough for me in my 30s where I was like, oh no, you need to allow yourself to be uncomfortable with the discomfort in the room without doing anything about it. You need to have a different relationship to it, which I think not many of us are taught.
That's a power of an empowered empath, is to be able to hold space. I'm just going to hold space and let this person be where they are, and think about it from the receiver's end. How many of us need that? Just someone to hold space and let us cry it out or talk it through or let it out, and to be able to be and stay with ourselves and be able to hold space.